You might think of magic as something, purely fantastical, defying the very laws of nature.
Hmm.
But what if I told you that our source today argues pretty much the opposite?
Oh,
That magic isn't supernatural at all, but actually a deep and intrinsic part of the natural world, and maybe even the incredible feats you hear about in legends. Well, they might even undersell its true potential.
that's quite a hook,
Yeah,
and it sets us up perfectly. Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into Eliphas Lévi's really pivotal work, Doctrine and Ritual of High Magic.
right.
We're looking at it in Mark Anthony Mikantuk's translation, which is quite meticulous, and it's also enriched by an introduction and some really insightful notes from John Michael Greer.
And this book, it's from the 19th century, but it's not just some historical curio, is it?
Not at all. It's a profound exploration of occult philosophy, magical practices, and it's rooted in this vast lineage of esoteric thought. It really pulls together a lot of threads.
And you, our listener, you actually provided this source. You were eager, as I understand it, to navigate its complexities, maybe extract the essential ideas without feeling too overwhelmed. Because, let's face it, it can seem a bit dense sometimes.
It certainly can be.
So our goal here is to be your guides, really, to illuminate the core insights and maybe some of the surprising revelations that Lévi offers about the very essence of magic.
And Levy's work, it really stands out. It's a remarkable synthesis, you could say.
How so?
Well, it seamlessly blends these philosophical inquiries, into the nature of the cosmos, human understanding, with historical references to all sorts of magical traditions.
Okay.
And maybe most captivatingly gets into the practical side of things, magical engagement. It covers both the underlying doctrines, the theory, and specific ritual elements.
Doctrine and ritual, like the title says.
Exactly. And as the translator points out, it's an unconventional book. Our aim today is to clarify, well, what makes it such a significant piece in this field?
Okay, let's start by unpacking Levy's view on knowledge and faith. It's quite a fascinating perspective he has there.
It really is. Levy suggests that while human reason, it can definitely grasp certain things about the cosmos, and facts, verifiable knowledge, should take precedence over blind faith, where we can know.
Right, where accurate information is possible.
Precisely. But he also argues there's this huge area of human experience, vital dimensions of existence, that just lie beyond what reason alone can grasp. He wasn't dismissing empirical evidence, not at all.
Just aware of its limits.
Exactly. Aware of its inherent boundaries.
Now, this is where Levy's own definition of magic takes a really interesting turn, I think, because you might expect, devil worship, impossible powers.
Forget all that. Levy explicitly refutes any idea that magic involves devil veneration or manipulating supernatural forces in a literal way.
He's quite clear on that.
Very clear. He states, and this is a direct quote, "There is nothing supernatural in the literal sense of that word that is above or outside of nature, full stop."
Wow.
And furthermore, he firmly dismisses the idea that magic can somehow, overturn the fundamental laws governing the natural world.
Okay, so if it's not supernatural, and it can't just break the laws of nature, what exactly does Lévi think magic is? What can it actually do?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
But-
And it's what he grapples with throughout the book. But to really get his answer, it helps immensely to consider some unacknowledged intellectual currents floating around at the time.
Unacknowledged.
Yeah, the translator, Greer, astutely points out two key figures. Lévi doesn't explicitly name them, but their ideas profoundly shaped 19th-century thought, and understanding them gives us crucial context for Lévi's project, which was partly about rehabilitating magic.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell us about these influential yet unnamed thinkers. Who were they, and why are they so important for understanding Lévi?
Well, the first is Cabalistic Vico, an Italian jurist, historian, lived somewhat in intellectual isolation initially, but his work, posthumously, it really resonated.
You go.
He dedicated himself to something he called philosophical philology. He was trying to develop an understanding of the humanities, history, language, myth that had the same kind of rigor as the new natural sciences that were emerging.
Ambitious.
Very. His major work, Principles of the New Science Concerning the Common Nature of Nations, often just called the New Science, it didn't get much attention at first. But then, after 1824, it just exploded onto the European intellectual scene.
And what was his core idea, basically?
Vico argued, in essence, that you could understand human societies, their institutions, their cultures, by studying their historical development and the patterns of human thought revealed in language and myth. He saw history as cyclical, driven by human nature.
Interesting. Okay, and the second key influence?
The second is Arthur Schopenhauer. a German philosopher. And like Vico, he was pretty obscure initially, but he actually lived long enough to see his work become this dominant force in 19th century thought, especially after 1851.
Schopenhauer. I've heard of him, of course. The world is will and representation.
That's the big one. And also, on the fourfold root of the principle of sufficient reason. His whole philosophical vision, with its emphasis on this underlying will as the driving force of everything, and his analysis of perception and experience, it just deeply resonated with the intellectual climate of Lévi's time.
So understanding Vico and Schopenhauer helps Lévi's ideas make more sense.
Absolutely. Recognizing their influence helps make Lévi's arguments, especially about non-material reality and symbolic meaning, much more coherent. It places him firmly within the broader intellectual conversation of his era.
Got it. Now, Lévi's book isn't just philosophy, right? The title, Doctrine and Ritual, suggests something more practical.
Oh, definitely. The Doctrine and Ritual of High Magic is very much intended as a practical handbook. It's a guide, you could say, for the aspiring mage.
A handbook for mages.
Okay, it lays out a specific path, a course of training and understanding for people who want to actively engage with these principles and practices.
But it's not exactly magic for dummies, I take it.
No, definitely not. And the translator offers a really crucial warning here. Lévi deliberately made his work difficult, intellectually demanding.
Why would he do that?
It wasn't uncommon back then for authors of magical texts. The idea was often to force readers to think for themselves, to dig deeper, to look beyond just the surface meaning, to really wrestle with the ideas.
So we shouldn't expect an easy ride if we were to pick it up ourselves.
Probably not straight away. Lévi uses what the translator calls dry wit and calculated absurdity. It's a stylistic thing, characteristic of some 19th century French literature, but he uses it as a tool.
A tool for what?
To make you stop and think, to challenge assumptions. It forces you to actively engage, grapple with the complexities, and arrive at your own understanding, rather than just passively swallowing easy answers.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's shift gears a bit and explore the historical backdrop for magic, as Lévi presents it. He talks about how people viewed magic over time, right?
Yes, he paints this picture of an ancient perspective on magic, stretching way back from figures like Zoroaster all the way to Apollonius of Tyana.
And what was that ancient view like?
It saw magic as this incredibly potent force, capable of really profound transformations, changing people into animals, animals into people, transmuting metals like in alchemy, even achieving immortality through an elixir of life.
That sounds much more like the myths and legends we usually associate with magic, turning lead into gold, the fountain of youth.
Exactly. But then, Lévi says, there was a big shift, a turning point with the rise of what he calls positivist Christianity.
Positivist Christianity.
Yeah, during this period, magic gradually went underground. It became occulted, hidden, and then subsequently demonized.
So it went from being seen as powerful art to something evil.
Pretty much. What was once potentially transformative became feared, linked with heresy and malevolence. This era, he says, was marked by strange and alarming rumors swirling around initiates. Accusations flew, causing death, insanity, engaging in, well, horrific practices. Leading eventually to that fervent cry, magicians to the flames, persecution.
Grim stuff. But wasn't there a time when magic and religion weren't necessarily enemies? Lévi mentioned something about that, doesn't he?
Yes, he points to a fascinating period, particularly within the intellectual world of the school of Alexandria.
Alexandria in Egypt.
That's the one. There was a time when magic and early Christian thought were surprisingly close, influenced by figures like Ammoniusakis, Plato. The teachings linked to Hermes Trismegistus found their way into writings attributed to Christian figures like Dionysius the Areopagite.
Really? Hermes Trismegistus and Christian thinkers?
And thinkers like Synesius were even using dream interpretation to write hymns. It was a time of intense philosophical blending and debate. It's also connected to Julian the Apostate, the Roman emperor who rejected Christianity for pagan philosophy. So yeah, the lines weren't always so sharply drawn.
Lévi then brings up a whole cast of historical characters associated with the occult sciences.
He does. People like Paracelsus, the famous physician and alchemist, Guillaume Postel, a really enigmatic figure, Cornelius Agrippa, author of 3 books of occult philosophy.
And what does he say about them?
He highlights the mysteries surrounding them. What secret knowledge did they possess? Why were they both admired and condemned so fiercely? He asks, quite movingly, what secret then have all these men carried to their tomb? Why do we admire them without knowing them? Why do we condemn them without a hearing?
Which leads right back to that fundamental question.
Exactly. Does a genuine, powerful form of magic actually exist?
And what's Levy's definitive answer? Does he believe in this real magic?
His answer is a clear, resounding yes. He states it directly. Yes, there existed and there still exists a powerful and real magic. Yes, what all the legends said about it were true. And
Wow.
then he adds this kicker, in this case only. Popular exaggerations were not simply off track, but less than the reality.
Less than the reality. So the truth is even bigger than the myths.
That's his bold claim. And it's the foundation for everything else he explores in the book. The doctrines, the rituals, all of it rests on this assertion of a real, powerful magic.
Okay, so if this powerful real magic exists, what are its core ideas? Its fundamental principles, according to Levy. Let's start with this concept he calls the great magical agent. That sounds important.
It's absolutely pivotal, central to his whole system. He describes it as this force inherent in nature, but way more powerful than, say, steam, which was the big energy source of his day.
Okay, a natural force, but super potent.
Right. A universal agent the ancients knew about. Its governing principle, he says, is equilibrium, balance, and mastering it is tied to what he calls the great arcanum of transcendental magic.
And what happens if you do master this agent?
Well, Levy suggests you could potentially influence the seasons, create daylight phenomena at night, achieve instant communication across the globe, even heal or harm someone at a distance.
That sounds pretty incredible, almost supernatural, even though he says it isn't.
It pushes the boundaries of what we normally consider natural, for sure. And he connects this agent to a whole range of things. Mesmer's work on animal magnetism, the alchemist's quest for the raw material of the great work, the Gnostics' idea of the flaming body of the Holy Spirit, even that mysterious figure Baphomet.
Baphomet, often linked to the Knights Templar.
That's the one, though its meaning is hotly debated. For Levy, it seems to symbolize this primal universal agent. He's basically proposing this fundamental interconnected energy field underlying everything. It resonates in a way with later ideas in physics or even depth psychology, a much more unified cosmos.
That's a huge range of connections. Okay, he also talks quite a bit about symbolism and transcendence.
Yes, this is crucial for him. He stresses the symbolic and transcendental aspects of our lives, our destinies. He uses ancient myths as examples. Oedipus, the story of Psyche.
How do they illustrate his point?
He sees them as examples of this great magical arcanum. These myths, with their themes of seeking forbidden knowledge, facing consequences, undergoing trials, they illuminate the deeper mysteries of existence for him. He even draws a parallel between Psyche and Eve, both driven by this thirst for knowledge, both experiencing a kind of fall from innocence.
Symbols holding deeper truths. Okay. And then there's the Kabbalah as a source. This comes up a lot in occult traditions.
A huge amount. For Levy, the Kabbalah is nothing less than an immense and hidden source of the universal philosophy.
So the Jewish mystical tradition?
Yes, he argues that the Hebrew Bible, as most people know it, only partially reveals the Hebrew's real, veiled religious science. He mentions texts like the Genesis of Enoch, which he believed was older than Moses and shared ideas with ancient Egyptian teachings, suggesting this long, hidden stream of knowledge.
And this hidden knowledge, it's esoteric versus exoteric.
Exactly. Knowledge for the initiates versus knowledge for the public. He points to Moses veiling his face as a symbol of this. He even called the Talmud a second unknown Bible, saying it contains profound insights hidden under layers of what might seem like absurdity. For Levy, the Kabbalah was a key to unlocking magic's principles.
Moving on slightly, Levy insists that magic isn't just about knowing stuff. It involves both science and force.
Absolutely, critical point for him. True magical power needs both a science, meaning knowledge and understanding, and a force, meaning will, energy, the ability to act.
Knowledge alone isn't enough.
He says without force, science is nothing, or rather is in danger. Mere theory without the power to enact it is useless, even potentially dangerous. Conversely, he says the supreme law of initiation is to take science only by force.
Force meaning willpower, determination.
Yes, active engagement. He even quotes the Bible, "The kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force," to emphasize this active, maybe even forceful nature of really grasping truth and power. It's not a passive thing.
He then gets into the importance of the ternary and quaternary, numbers 3 and 4. What's their significance in occult thinking?
They are absolutely fundamental building blocks in Levy's system and in much of esoteric philosophy. The ternary, 3, he links to divine elements, revelation, morality. Think, for example, of the Holy Trinity, 3 persons in one God.
Okay. And the quaternary, 4.
He connects 4 to the structure of God and the universe.
Mm.
Like the 4 letters in many ancient names for God, like YHWH, the 4 elements, the 4 cardinal directions, they represent the foundations of the manifest world for him.
And then there's a symbol most people recognize, the cross. It has a deep meaning for Lévi, too.
A very deep and multifaceted one. He sees the cross primarily as symbolizing unity emerging from duality, 2 lines intersecting.
Okay.
He considers it a key to ancient mysteries, linking it to Osiris in Egypt, the Gnostic Staros. He even sees it as the keystone in the symbolic temple. He plays with French words too, croire, to believe, and croître, to grow, linking faith, science, and progress through the symbol of the cross.
That's quite a layered interpretation. Let's tackle a more abstract idea now. The astral light. What on earth is that in Lévi's system?
Ah, the astral light.
Yeah.
Tricky, but central. He describes it as this universal, subtle medium. Think of it like an invisible substance or energy filling all space. It's analogous, he says, to the sun's light, but operates differently, influenced by attraction and projection.
So not like normal physical forces.
No, it's distinct. He suggests it's the medium for animal instincts, but it can also distort human intelligence, creating illusions, phantasms, and crucially, he sees it as this vast cosmic memory bank, a repository of all verbs, all actions ever done, all forms that ever existed.
Like the Akashic records, almost.
Very similar concept, yes.
Yeah.
He connects it to Swedenborg's idea of personal atmospheres and talks about magnetic respiration being contagious, both physically and morally. It's this invisible medium connecting everything, carrying thoughts, emotions, life force.
Okay, wow. And then we have the pentagram, probably the most famous symbol associated with magic.
Indeed. And for Lévi, the pentagram, the 5-pointed star, is the ultimate symbol of the human will's power over that astral light. It represents the microcosm, the human being as a reflection of the universe.
Power over the astral light.
Yes, and specifically power over what he calls elementary spirits, the forces of nature, earth, air, fire, water. He quotes Faust's monologue celebrating the pentagram's significance, its connection to nature's hidden energies that the wise soul can perceive.
He also really hammers home the importance of will and imagination in magic.
Absolutely vital. He argues that the human light, the light projected by our will, is guided by our intelligence and, critically, our imagination.
How is that different from the astral light?
The astral light, or fluid, he sees as operating by blind mechanism, like a dead light. But our will-projected light is directed, shaped by thought and imagination. He stresses the immense power of a focused will and calls a disciplined imagination an indispensable tool for any magical work.
Given all this talk of power and will, he must warn about the dangers too. You mentioned danger of unprepared practice.
Oh, absolutely. He issues a very serious warning against just dabbling in magic out of curiosity without proper preparation. He compares it to children playing with gunpowder.
Right.
Very dangerous.
So what's needed first?
He insists on the need for mental and emotional tranquility, detachment from base passions and desires, and developing an inflexible, unwavering will, something secured, he says, through repeated acts, through consistent practice. These are prerequisites for safely handling these potent forces.
Okay. He then brings up the septenary, the number 7. How does that fit in?
7, the septenary, he sees as representing a kind of complete magical unity. It's formed by combining the quaternary, 4, representing the material foundation, and the ternary, 3, representing the spiritual.
4 plus 3 equals 7.
Right. He connects it to realization, the unfolding of the divine word or verb within creation. It signifies a complete cycle of manifestation and understanding in his system.
Interesting. He also mentioned something perhaps unexpected, the power of public opinion.
Yes, it's a fascinating aside. He sees public opinion as a surprisingly strong force, linked to those sympathetic currents in the astral life, or astral light we talked about.
How so?
He uses historical examples, the fates of figures like Marat during the French Revolution, or kings like Charles IX and Henry IV. He suggests that collective belief, public sentiment, can actually exert a tangible, even decisive influence on events. It's a kind of collective psychic force.
And the number 9, that has a specific link to initiation.
It does. 9 is linked to divine reflections, but also belief, superstition, and initiation. Lévi's point is that the true initiate, through gaining knowledge, actually reigns over superstition. They understand the mechanisms behind belief and aren't ruled by unfounded fears. They navigate the shadows with understanding.
A recurring theme seems to be the importance of action.
Hugely important for Lévi. He's very clear. Intentions without acts are basically useless. All intentions which are not manifested by acts are vain intentions, he says, and the words which express them are idle words.
Talk is cheap.
Essentially, it is action which proves life, and it is also action which proves and certifies the will. Your will is only real if it leads to action. Deeds validate purpose.
He also talks about magical equilibrium. We touched on balance with the great magical agent.
Right, equilibrium is key.
Yeah.
It's the result of two opposing forces constantly interacting. He links it directly to life itself, like breathing in, breathing out, that constant alternation.
And this was reflected in rituals.
Yes, he describes ancient magical rites that symbolize this balance. Using two altars, maybe two different kinds of offerings, even specific clothing for the magician that represented duality or balance. His core point is that nothing in real magic is arbitrary. It's all determined by the doctrine of analogy. Correspondences across different levels.
Let's get into some of the more, ritualistic aspects he discusses, like the conjuration of the four.
Okay. This involves invoking and directing the four elemental forces: spirit, matter, movement, rest. Lévi sees these as arising from a central fire of universal energy.
The elements: earth, air, fire, water.
Essentially, yes, though framed a bit more abstractly sometimes. He talks about the astral light being saturated with influences, souls, that could affect elemental phenomena, storms, earthquakes, etc. He includes fragments of actual conjurations in the text.
Like what?
Things like a blessing for salt, a prayer attributed to the gnomes, earth elementals, and direct addresses to the forces associated with the archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Aniel, often linked to the elements or directions.
And the flaming pentagram comes into play here.
Yes, in these kinds of rituals, the flaming pentagram is a powerful symbol. It represents the trained intellect, the magician's will, dominating and directing those elemental forces. Control through understanding and focused intent.
Lévi also mentions specific magical tools.
Briefly, yes. He emphasizes their symbolic nature. He mentions the wand, calling it the verendum of the mage, suggesting something sacred or secret about it. And the sword, typically steel with a copper cross hilt, often engraved.
What do they represent?
Generally, the wand represents the will, the power to direct energy, while the sword represents authority, the power to command or banish, and mental clarity. They aren't magic in themselves, but tools to focus the magician's inner power and intent, extensions of their will, embodying the forces they work with.
He also gives some practical advice about the importance of discretion.
Very important advice. He strongly warns against boasting about magical achievements or trying to convince skeptics by performing flashy effects.
Why not? If you can do it, why not show it?
He says, never yield to the desire to convince through effects. His reasoning is that such displays rarely convince true skeptics anyway, and they risk attracting unwanted attention, misunderstanding, or even persecution from those who fear or condemn such things. Keep it quiet.
That makes sense. Now, Lévi proposes his own idea of the one true religion. What's that about?
He imagines this universal religion, but one grounded in demonstrable truth, reason, evidence, and these universal analogies he keeps talking about.
So not based on faith alone.
No, distinct from faith-based systems. Though he says it's not necessarily contradictory to them, it's a more intellectual, perhaps philosophical path. He does suggest, though, that this reasonable religion might not be for everyone. The masses, he implies, might need myths and fables.
A religion for the initiated, perhaps, which connects to his ideas on initiation and power.
Exactly. He stresses that initiation is essential for accessing real magical power. He points to the rigorous trials, the self-denial, the profound self-abandonment required in ancient initiations, like those rumored to have occurred in Thebes, Memphis, or within Pythagorean schools.
So power isn't just given, it's earned.
Earned through intense effort, perseverance, and deep personal transformation. It's a demanding path.
He mentions the magical chain of the word. What does he mean by that?
This refers to the incredible power of language, of eloquence, the electrifying effect, he calls it, that well-spoken words can have on people, even on whole societies.
Like a charismatic leader.
Precisely. He gives historical examples. Peter the Hermit whipping up fervor for the Crusades, Napoleon's command over his troops, the influence of writers like Proudhon or Voltaire. It's the power of the spoken or written word. imbued with conviction and understanding to move and shape minds.
And related to the power of the mind, he talks about the role of belief and imagination in miracles.
Yes, he argues that our internal verb, our core beliefs, our focused imagination actively shapes our reality.
How does he illustrate this?
He gives examples like water under hypnosis, seeming to taste like wine because of suggestion, or how love can literally transfigure how you perceive someone. There's an anecdote about a wife seeing roses where her husband only saw bread, all pointing to the power of belief and imagination to create our experience.
Interesting. He also clarifies his view on something often misunderstood, metempsychosis, or reincarnation.
Right. He tackles the common idea of souls literally moving into animal bodies after death. He suggests maybe not quite like that.
So no literal transmigration.
Less literal, more
Hmm.
symbolic or influential. He proposes that animal forms or natures can exert a kind of sympathetic influence on the human astral body we discussed. This might manifest as personality traits.
Can you give an example?
He uses the idea of a very passive person taking on a sheepish quality. Or he references the biblical stories of Daniel interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's dream of becoming like a beast, seeing these as allegories for how human consciousness can be influenced or even temporarily overwhelmed by more primal animalistic characteristics due to spiritual or psychological states.
Okay, that's a different take. Let's talk about healing. What's the true nature of healing for Lévi?
He looks back to early Christianity, emphasizing that faith and charity were central to their healing practices. More profoundly, he suggests many illnesses actually start with moral or spiritual problems, disorders of the soul, if you will.
So you need to heal the spirit first.
That's his implication. Spiritual healing is often the necessary first step towards lasting physical well-being. Address the root cause.
He also defines divination as divine power.
Yes, for him, true divination isn't just fortune-telling. It's actually exercising a kind of divine power, applying divine science or understanding. He briefly interprets the 7 angels from the Book of Revelation as representing different historical epochs, showing how divination can relate to understanding larger patterns.
And throughout the book, there's this recurring idea of the universal key, the clavicle of Solomon.
Yes, the little key of Solomon. Lévi claims to have found or rediscovered this lost universal key. He believes it unlocks all the secrets of magic, of comparative religious doctrines.
The ultimate master key.
That's the idea. He presents it as having the power to open up understanding of all ancient mysteries and reveal the underlying unity behind different traditions.
And the tarot seems closely related to this universal key idea for him.
Absolutely. He sees the tarot deck as essentially a hieroglyphic book in picture form. He believes it contains all the secrets of the Kabbalah, all the principles of magic, all the wisdom of the ancients encoded in its symbols.
He gives an example.
He describes the symbolism of the chariot card in detail, showing how each element, the sphinxes, the driver, the canopy, represents complex esoteric ideas. For him, the tarot is a visual representation of that universal key.
He also mentions briefly an analogy between physical and moral.
Just a quick note, but important. He suggests that in primordial, or perhaps perfect language, there were direct parallels between physical relationships and moral or spiritual ones. The structure of language itself reflected the structure of reality, both seen and unseen.
Like metaphors being literally true on some level.
Something like that. Think about how we talk about a heavy heart or seeing the light. He believed these weren't just figures of speech, but reflected deeper analogical truths.
And he warns about taking symbols too literally. Misinterpretations of symbolism.
Yes, he uses the example, the world is an egg. A profound symbolic statement, perhaps, about creation or potential. But he says the vulgar or literal-minded person hears that and just thinks it's nonsense, missing the deeper meaning entirely. A common problem when dealing with esoteric ideas.
What about his approach to philosophy and metaphysics?
He argues for what he calls a metaphysics of nature, one grounded in studying existence, comparing different levels of reality. He wants to move beyond pure mysticism or vague speculation.
Towards something more rigorous?
Yes, he advocates for philosophy as the pure mathematics of the realities, something precise that encompasses both the physical world and the moral or spiritual dimensions, a unified science of being.
He also makes a strong statement about man as creator.
A very strong statement. He emphasizes the idea that we as individuals create our own heaven and hell through our thoughts, beliefs, and actions. The real demons, he suggests, aren't external monsters, but the demons of madness, our own internal conflicts, fears, and delusions.
Despite the warnings, he seems optimistic about the revival of occult knowledge.
He does express optimism. He sees the renewed interest in things like the universal agent, the astral light, in his time as a positive sign. He thinks it could open up new paths for human intelligence and activity, maybe lead to better forms of leadership based on deeper understanding.
And he lays out some first steps to mastery for someone wanting to pursue this.
Yes, some initial steps for the aspiring mage. First, tame your passions. Gain emotional control. Second, study the balanced forces in nature and the self. Third, understand ternary symbolism, the power of three. And fourth, learn to dominate and direct your imagination. Foundational work.
He even lists some spirits of the hours.
Briefly, yes. As an example of traditional magical lore, he lists some spirits associated with the sixth hour of the day and their supposed areas of influence, things like free will, journeys, finding treasures, acquiring fine things, even vengeance. It shows the kind of detailed correspondences found in magical texts.
And he includes actual examples of spells and protections.
He does some very simple ones, like casting salt for a general blessing or protection, or a specific charm to protect sheep from wolves. He presents these matter-of-factly, highlighting their connection to faith and using natural elements.
He also gives examples of exorcisms and conjurations.
Yes, excerpts for different days of the week. They typically involve invoking divine names, angelic names, and seeking protection from negative influences or evil spirits. Again, illustrating the practical ritual side.
How does Lévi handle criticism? He offers a defense against critics.
He addresses it directly. He says he makes a point not to answer insults with more insults. Instead, he feels sorry for critics whose rigid beliefs lead them to make rash judgments and attack his work without perhaps fully understanding it, a rather detached stance.
We talked about action earlier. He returns to the philosophy of the verb, action.
Yes, he really emphasizes that the verb primarily means action, manifestation, doing. It's more fundamental than just words or thoughts. He connects this to the idea that you have to earn the right to speak, to be considered wise through your deeds. Action proves the will.
And he applies this verb idea historically to the divine and human verb and the French Revolution.
It's a fascinating interpretation. He sees the French Revolution as this huge, dramatic, divine experience, a clash and eventual reconciliation between the divine verb, perhaps representing tradition, order, and the human verb, representing reason, rights, change. He sees the outcome, the reform, and the rights of man as a product of this cosmic dialogue or struggle.
And looking forward, he ends on a hopeful note about the convergence of divine and human wisdom.
He does. He expresses this belief, this prediction, really, of a future synthesis, a time when divine wisdom informs humanity and human wisdom is guided by divine principles. These two working together, he believes, will lead to the salvation of the world, a grand, optimistic vision.
So that was quite a journey through Lévi's complex world. As we wrap up this deep dive, what are maybe 2 or 3 of the biggest takeaways, the things that might really stick with you, our listener, who wanted those core insights?
Well, I think perhaps the most striking, maybe even challenging idea is Lévi's insistence that magic isn't supernatural, that it's a potent natural force, just one we don't fully understand or utilize yet. That really shifts the perspective.
Right, that's a big one. What else?
I'd say his deep focus on symbolism, the idea that ancient texts, myths, even rituals like the tarot are packed with layers of meaning, holding profound truth if you learn how to read them. It suggests there's hidden wisdom all around us.
Okay, the natural force idea, the power of symbolism. One more.
And finally, the sheer power he attributes to the human mind specifically, the focused will and the disciplined imagination. The idea that our internal state, our beliefs, our verb, actively shapes our reality. That's a pretty radical concept of human potential.
And how might exploring these ideas be relevant for you, the listener, today, even if you're not planning to become an aspiring mage?
Well, whether your interest is history, philosophy, psychology, religion, or just understanding the nature of reality, Lévi offers this really unique alternative lens. It challenges conventional thinking. Understanding these concepts, even if you don't fully agree with them, can definitely enrich your perspective on, well, almost any field of knowledge that deals with human belief, history, or the mind. It adds context.
Absolutely. And as we've seen, this deep dive has really only skimmed the surface of Lévi's doctrine and ritual. There's so much more in there.
Oh, for sure. It leaves us with perhaps a final thought, a provocative question to ponder. If magic is indeed a natural force, as Lévi argues, What are the ethical responsibilities that come with trying to understand it, let alone potentially wield it?
That's a heavy question.
It is, and it's one that echoes beyond the 19th century, right into our modern quest to understand consciousness, the universe, and our place within it all. Something to definitely think about.